I met with just a wonderful woman who, I'm not going to name her. I failed to ask if I could. But I know she watches DarkHorse. And she is finding herself angry. And in talking angry that so many among her circle of oldest friends and some among her family are responding to her like she's the problem. And for not vaccinating her children, for not wearing a mask when she's outside, for not trusting the public health officials that we know have been lying to us now for a long time, and not trusting the next thing that comes out of their mouths. For this, she is being told that she is wrong, and I began to say, yeah, they judge us, don't they? And I realized in this conversation I had with her, no, we're all judging each other now. We are all judging each other. We seem to be, so many of us, increasingly certain of our positions. And I also saw a piece of theater in Portland that put this into very sharp relief, in which a person who has simply adopted, it was a one-woman show, a person who has simply adopted all of the narratives from the mainstream and the public health apparatus as the truth, as the only truth, as the forever truth, has said, I was watching her certainty and thought, well, okay, how is her certainty? How are the people in our lives who are angry with us for making these decisions that we feel more and more certain we're the right ones, how is their certainty different from our certainty? And one of the things I arrived at was, we didn't start out certain. We started out skeptical and hesitant and employing the precautionary principle with things like, where's this virus from? What might it do? How's it going to proceed? Let's use the wisdom that we do have as, for instance, evolutionary biologists, as bat biologists, as people with a history of thinking about granting agencies, and figure out what we think might be true and figure out what the predictions of those ideas would be. And let's see what happens. And when, for instance, the COVID vaccines were beginning to be rolled out, and we were told they're safe, they're 100% safe, there are a lot of us who said, you just lied to us. Not because we knew that they weren't 100% safe, because we didn't, but because we knew that they couldn't know.
No, you got to be careful about that. They could not be 100% safe if they didn't know whether or not they did harm. They could have been 100% harmless, but the safety comes from knowing that they do no harm.
Maybe this is important. It doesn't strike me as important at the moment, that distinction. And I think that's going to muddle the issue here, because this is a very important issue, and I think you're going to have to let me not go down that semantic road for the moment, and you can do the clarification that you think you need to afterwards. Our objections, not just us, but so many people's objections, people with scientific training, people without scientific training, people in all lines of work, at the point that a new medical treatment is brought to market and we are told they're 100% safe, what we know for sure is you can't know that. There hasn't been time. We are uncertain. We were at that point uncertain. We, in fact, we assumed we're going to wait as long as possible, and then we'll get them, because we will get them probably, right? Mm-hmm. And then weeks passed and months passed, and more evidence did become public, and it became clearer and clearer that actually not safe, not effective. By contrast, the people who were certain in the other direction started out that way. They were told by people who were not telling them the truth, these are safe and effective, and they said, they're safe and effective, and anyone who says differently is a conspiracy theorist, an anti-vaxxer, or whatever. And so the prediction I want to make, which is maybe prediction isn't even exactly the right word here, but the prediction I want to make is that even though I, at this point, have a high degree of certainty that for instance, the COVID vaccines are neither safe nor effective. I did not start out that way. And I think that if you take the two camps, such as it is, over in COVID vaccine territory, the what is wrong with you people? Why are you putting us all in harm's way? Take the damn vaccine crowd. And the absolutely not, I'm not going to do it, and what are you doing to your children crowd. At the moment, the people in these crowds seem to have similar levels of certainty with opposite valences. But the prediction is that there are some people over in the I'm not getting near your damn vaccine crowd who started out that way, and they were also being non-scientific in their approach, right? But my prediction is that there are more people over in the I'm not taking that treatment crowd who started out uncertain and skeptical and hesitant and using the precautionary principle and using science. And as more and more evidence came in, developed a higher degree of certainty because that's what science does for you. And that by contrast, the people over here who started out certain that this was going to be the thing that ended the pandemic have changed in no way in their certainty, even as evidence has arrived in abundance to the contrary, that their degree of certainty has not changed. And when you see anyone with a position whose degree of certainty has not changed, you know they are not thinking logically, you know they are not thinking scientifically, and you know that for all of their talk about nuance and following the science and all of that, they are wrong. Whether or not they're deceiving themselves or just deceiving you, I don't know. It doesn't matter, but they are wrong.
All right, several things to say about this. One, I want to point out that there are two instances in which I know myself to have visibly changed my position in a way that you could even go back and check.
In this pandemic.
In the context of the pandemic.
Yeah.
One of them is at the very start. The following thing can be found on Twitter. You and I, as we've talked about before, did not know about the novel coronavirus until we emerged from finishing the first draft of our book, where we were deep in the Amazon, where we had no connectivity, unaware that there was a news story brewing. Mm-hmm. As we emerged to the first place that your phone connects, a military checkpoint.
End of January 2020.
Yep. We emerged to news. We were in Ecuador. We emerged to news that there was this novel coronavirus, which we started to wrap our minds around. And oddly, that the first case had just arrived in Ecuador. So we were getting information on our phone in Spanish, new case, novel coronavirus from China, etc. As I looked into it, story was, this was a bat virus that had jumped to humans. I knew something about the family of bats in question because I had been a bat researcher. And I tweeted something that said, I haven't looked very deeply into this story, but so far it seems to check out. Right? I know these animals. I know something about these viruses circulating in these animals. It looks right to me. And I got back a tweet from an account that I knew only online. And the account said something like, yeah, right, it's a coincidence that this happened in a city that had a level 4, biosafety level 4 lab studying these exact viruses. And I looked at that and I thought, what don't I know? What the hell? That is a weird coincidence.
That thought, what don't I know? Anyone who doesn't ask themselves that question on the regular is also not trustworthy.
Right. Thing is, so I retracted my claim that this story made sense. I didn't yet know what made sense, but I knew at that point that there was something here that I had not factored into my calculations. So whatever I had said publicly didn't make any sense. Yes. And, it could have been that it was that the story did check out and that the existence of the laboratory in Wuhan was a coincidence, which I guess I would have figured out over time. But the point is, I believe the two tweets are separated just by accident by exactly an hour, right? That the whole thing, the recognition that I had said something that I now knew was not grounded because it missed a whole set of facts that were potentially relevant, that's captured in the space of exactly 1 hour in that case.
And it could have been an hour, a day, a week, a month, a year.
It could have been anything.
It could have been anything, but the point is you went back and you said, my level of certainty was too high, and as it turns out, the wrong valence.
Right.
Right.
And so anyway, this is, it makes, I remember my emotional state that I like saying, hey, I said something scientifically about something in my own discipline, and now an hour later I've got to take it back. Do I like that? No, but it's far better far better than sticking with a wrong idea because it would be embarrassing to admit that it was wrong.
Well, there's a sunk costs fallacy there too, right? That you did not succumb to, but that most people do. Well, I've already done the thing. I've already this. Is it sunk? Maybe it's not. Maybe that's not quite the right fallacy. There's a I don't.
There's a good money after bad.
It's good money after bad. Okay, that's it. So I don't. Oh, this is going to be bad. This is going to feel really uncomfortable. The longer you wait, the worse it gets, guys.
Well, and I think the thing that is important not to have done, right? Mm-hmm. One could do the calculation and say, well, okay, I've just learned something I didn't know. It changes my private certainty about how sensible the story that I've heard is. Mm-hmm. But it's possible that the story that I believe is correct is still going to turn out to be correct. So if I can just...
The zoonotic origin.
Yeah, if I can just put off making a correction, then it's possible the problem solves itself, right? That is a way to get yourself in trouble, which is why I didn't do that, right? The right thing to do is to say, actually, as of now, I'm aware that even if the natural origin story turns out to be right, that it has to overcome a threshold that I didn't even realize existed because I didn't know that lab was there.
That's just so beautiful. That right there, that is an encapsulation of both what you do and what all scientists should do, and what everyone should do in communicating with the world, having made a statement and having learned that there's more to the thing that you pronounced upon with such certainty. Be like Bret, do that.
Well, you'll just be happier, right? Because the fact is, the relief that you experience for having gotten yourself back to ground you're comfortable with, right? The point is, you're actually taking a risk, saying, yeah, I've looked at this paper, seems to add up, thing emerged from bats, in some normal way, right? And then it's like, oh goodness, what didn't I know, right? There's a fact I didn't have. And then the point is, the point you say publicly, actually this fact potentially looks important, I need to know more about it, then it's not haunting you. It's not lurking, waiting to leap out, you're not, constantly keeping track of how much danger this thing you said is leaving you in. So anyway, even from the point of view of your own sanity.
It's an honest accounting.
It's an honest accounting that means that in the present, you don't have to worry about saying too much or something like that.
And that's not to say, so I think a different approach, the approach that I have tended to take is, I don't until relatively recently, this is 100%, I just don't make pronouncements out into the world until I've actually, I'm really prepared to do it, because I don't want to have to keep track of all of the things that I've said that I then do have to actually go and correct when I'm wrong. And obviously podcasting changes that dynamic quite a lot, but I was thinking specifically of social media. Mm-hmm. There is such a joy and a human potential in sitting in uncertainty and being like, oh, this thing is happening. I don't know what it means. I don't know what the significance is. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what it's going to do. And yet, we, in the following 2 months, we're having these conversations around our dinner table every day, going I think actually these conversations that we're having are worth sharing. And that was actually what began the live streams. Yep. I began to say to you, as our boys' schools were being shut down, it's we actually have things to share. And we weren't right about everything early on at all, by any means.
Right.
But we were having conversations by which we were demonstrating how you might figure out what is true.
And that's the thing, is it's not were you right? It's do you have a process for becoming right? The process for becoming right involves the uncertainty. It involves saying things that turn out to be wrong, discovering that they are wrong, being honest with yourself and others about it. That's the process, and science formalizes a piece of this.
Right.
But nonetheless, it's obviously the right thing to do. Now, if I think back, I remember exactly where we were during this 1 hour wobble between perspectives here. And I remember, I think, my thought process. Why did I weigh in on a story that was so new, right? Why not just hold off and see? And I believe that my thought process was, how many bat biologists does the world know? right? Not that many.
Right.
I studied under actually one who became quite famous. She now tragically died very early in the field, Elizabeth Calco, who, you probably heard that Xi Zhengli was called the Batwoman because she studied bats in China. Well, no, the real Batwoman was Elizabeth Calco, and she was a force to be reckoned with. But anyway, the point is, the world does not know very many bat biologists. I happen to be a bat biologist with hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers, and I felt an obligation to say something precisely because I didn't want conspiracy, undisciplined conspiracy thoughts to emerge from this.
People who showed up certain on the other side without any evidence. Right? Certainty at the beginning of anything like this is a tell.
Yeah.
You're not thinking carefully. Are you trying to sell me something? Are you just confused? At some level, it doesn't matter. You're not thinking carefully.
Right. So what I said was effectively, this isn't my story. I don't have a dog in this fight, but I do know the bats, right? I know that these viruses circulate amongst them. The story I see written here makes sense to me, right? And that basically says, look, on a first pass, this is a plausible story. It wasn't a plausible story, it turns out. Right, and the process of discovery that led there, does involve a willingness to be uncertain, including in the first, hour after you've said what you thought was I didn't say anything. I didn't say the story is true.
Yeah,
I said
I think it checks out.
It looks
checks out.
Superficially looks right. The other place where my wrong initial perspective is absolutely captured is masks. Of which, as you know,
We talked a lot about masks earlier.
We talked a lot about masks. I was very early on using masks and advocating for them.
You made me so grumpy. I did not want to go into stores masked early on, and you're like, it's the thing. And I came around, and then we both came around the other way.
Yep.
But
I had a model in my head, and I remember I talked about it. I showed it on DarkHorse, in which the idea was, well, how much I can use my camera to tell me how much light is blocked by a bandana. And it's a fair amount. And that, to me, suggested the likelihood that particles would be blocked. And you can say, well, particles are too tiny, they go through the holes. Apparently they do. Yep. But photons are also very tiny. What photons don't do is, there's no flow pattern around a fiber, right? The photon hits the fiber or it doesn't. It doesn't, steer around it. Right. Whereas air flowing over probably brings the particles through the mask, which is probably why they don't work very well.
Yep. Excuse me.
But the following thing also occurs to me in hearing your description here, which is that we had this recent, you say we're all judging each other. And I think this is true.
I think we are. I know that
when I see people wearing masks, I have a thought that I can't stop, especially when I see them wearing masks outside. Right? It's like, okay, what model is running around in your head, years into this, that you still think it makes sense for you to mask yourself outdoors?
But I'm going to say here something to you that you often say to me while I'm trying to figure out what is going on in their heads. And you say that it's not like that. Yeah. Like very often, and I assume that in some cases it is a model and it's just a bad model, but very often it's not a model. And this is to my point about they arrived at the certainty upon being told a thing, and it doesn't get updated. It's not a model. It's not a complex living thing. It's a conclusion. End of story. Done.
Right. Now, this is exactly where I'm headed. Is that you and I had the following episode in our own life, a minor thing, but you and I had an appointment with somebody, and I can't remember which one of us had come down with a slight respiratory something, a little cold that under ordinary pre-COVID circumstances would not be worth even mentioning. It just would be like, oh, that's annoying. But we were going to meet with this person, and in light of COVID...
For the first time. This wasn't someone we knew before, right?
Yep. I felt it was necessary to warn her and to give her the option to cancel the meeting in case this was COVID, right? And she suggested, quite rightly, how about you wear a mask? And I said, how about we don't wear masks and we meet outside, and then when we go inside to look at the samples or whatever it was that we needed to see, that then we will put on a mask. But then...
2, in fact. We didn't share masks.
No, we had 2 entirely different masks. But I remember having the weird thought, like, I do not want the cost of being seen to wear a mask, which implies either a simplistic and wrong model of COVID or no model at all, as you point out, is likely going on with many of these people. And so it was like, actually, the fact that I don't wear a mask, I certainly don't wear a mask outdoors, but in this case, I was going to put on a mask, right? Now that becomes complex. It's actually evidence. That pattern, if you saw, hour after hour of not wearing a mask and then, slight respiratory something, and because I'm the person who might be spreading whatever it is, wearing a mask makes more sense. That's evidence of a nuanced model. It's not evidence of the absence of a model, but because masks are something that we now judge each other for because of the way that they have been politicized, it was a tough calculation that shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
The right thing to do was to say, look, there's very little harm in it in this case. I'm not committing to wear a mask, in general. It just, it happens as a courtesy. It made sense.